My name's Terence Stevenson. I'm president of GS1 UK Healthcare, and I'm also a professor of pediatrics at University College London. Could I invite the other panelists up for this session, please? So earlier today you heard a name check for, I think by Alistair McClellan possibly, to Jeremy Hunt. And I want to give this session on interoperability a historical context. In 2013, I went for a meeting with Jeremy Hunt, and I'd been at my hospital before the meeting. And he asked me what I'd been doing. And I started to explain to him my kind of average day. And he couldn't really believe it, because what I was talking about was the problems of interoperability, where the electronic prescribing, the electronic patient record, and the electronic digital imaging system did not speak to one another. And you would have to log out of one to log into the other. I think he thought I was kind of hamming this up, trying to make some cheap point. And he said, well, if it's really like that, why don't you write it up? And I wrote it up in the British Medical Journal in 2013. It's a sort of parody of Star Trek. It starts with a star date, and it talks about what the NHS was like then and what it might be like in the future. And the title of the article was To Boldly Go from a Computer Says No to an iNHS. And I think from what we've heard already this morning, actually, things have progressed hugely since 2013. We may not be quite there yet, as Ming said, but we may not have a true iNHS, but I think we've seen huge progress. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and obviously some of the ongoing obstacles. And then you'll get a chance to ask the three panelists questions. We're going to start, the order is, we're going to start with Tim Ho. Tim, like me, is a clinician. He's a physician at Frimley Health NHS Foundation Trust, where he's also Chief Medical Officer. And Tim, you're going to start talking about breaking down barriers to data sharing.
Thanks very much. I'm not a surgeon, I'm a chest physician, so I'll just get that out of the way first of all. Interoperability is actually key, and actually in our organisation, just to give it in context, is that we were completely paper-based up until 2022, and we're working across 3 sites. So our organisation is a microcosm of why interoperability is key. So we put in an EPR, not the cheapest, but it allowed us to go from about 264 systems to basically 1. And that allowed our clinicians across a very large populace to actually start communicating in a very seamless way, in a way that people didn't imagine before. But having got to that point, we also have to communicate with our neighbours. And actually, that's the key. We are, I'll name it, we are an epic island in a Cerner world. And what we've found is that we've had to learn how to communicate through that. Now, the keys for most clinicians is actually about information. And at the heart of it is, do we have the full picture of a patient, both their history, their medications, and what's happened to them? And that's a data flow. And that's one of the things that we've been really trying to work on. And it's that's been at the key of why we need to get better interoperability. It's been interesting because there are a whole load of different systems out there. I think Ming pointed this out. It shouldn't be based on the system. It should be based on the data, which have a common data pool. And whatever system you use should be able to pull into that. And at the moment, when we talk to neighbouring organisations, it's at a very sort of, I would say, superficial level. Essentially, we've got data viewers. But the actual mechanism, pulling data, true data across organisation, I think is the next step. And that's what we're trying to work on now. GS1 and Scan for Safety is trying to implement a standard, and what we're finding is trying to get an individual supplier to actually comply, because that would allow us greater interoperability across different organisations. So we are on a journey, as they say, but the key is trying to work out how we find a commonality that allows us to do it. The key is that commonality, because that will improve patient safety. I will say it will reduce cost and increase productivity, because if you know what's happened to a patient in their entirety, it's less likely that you're going to repeat what you have to do, and you're more likely to interact and get the right interactions earlier in that pathway.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to go to Andy Rains next, who's CIO at Papworth Hospital in Cambridge, which is a cardiac and chest hospital I've visited. Probably the places I've visited, probably it's quite close to that vision in 2013 of what an iNHS might look like. It's not quite Star Trek. It doesn't have lithium drives. But hey, Andy, you're getting there, aren't you?
Thanks very much, Terence. Yeah, it's great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. And I agree with Tim and what Ming said. I think we introduced an EPR in 2017. We took Lorenzo as part of the national programme, and we went from HIMSS 0 to HIMSS 5 within about 18 months. And it was felt, because of the implementation of it, that we took people with us, that it lent to be the success that it was. We were the UK's first site to do a bidirectional interface with Epic, in fact, at Addenbrooke's, and that means we can exchange lab results to and from one system to another, so that they're returned back into Lorenzo in almost real time. But I think, for me, I think why should EPR solution providers care about this so much is that they create the opportunity, or data standards do, for more reliable and consistent information. They help safety and reduce costs. I think Tim mentioned that. So in many respects, they're a golden thread. EPRs carry that potential and the benefits of standardised data in an increasingly what we are, which is a connected world between systems. So as a CIO, I see the challenges of purchasing systems and then trying to connect them to a point of actually I'm more agnostic about who the vendor is or what they're developing, rather just coalesce around the standard and data, because that tells me actually we've got an interoperable layer that can utilise that data. And that's actually what we've achieved at Royal Papworth. So we've got systems that are connected through using a data standard like GS1, but also things like data languages like SNOMED, for example, which communicate a common language and theme. And I think surely that's the aim in terms of creating a one NHS, that almost the application is irrelevant, but that you coalesce around the data and the data standards and access to that. And we've done some more work around taking that further. So if you look at the King's Fund, they've written a paper which is interoperability is more than tech. They talk about people, process, and technology. And that's about collaboration, people collaborating, people understanding the processes, and then putting those systems in. But you've got to start with and be very firm in the baseline in terms of saying, actually, we're going to buy with standards in mind for this to work. And I think that has to be a premise. It's either a standard or it's not. If you go with the view that it's not a standard, you'll end up with some dichotomy, a plethora of different systems which don't communicate and don't talk to one another. So I think that's really important. I think one of the things that's also changed in the landscape, which is about systems and systems applications, is that here I talk about a lot of applications whereby actually we need to move to this application. We must all be on this system. And I think something fundamentally has changed with our technical architecture in the last few years, which is, I think last week I was reading, cyber attacks are up by 40%, for example. And Synovis, CrowdStrike, they're outages or systems that have been commissioned at scale to cover big patches that have been the result of a cyber attack, and they've brought large communities down, have a ripple effect, and then create further disruption. And you could say, well, let's talk about business continuity, disaster recovery, and that's right. But I think we're actually getting to a point whereby we need to have the balance and have in place circuit breakers that are driven by different systems using the same standards to help communicate that message.
Thanks, Andy. Ming, you gave us an overview of the national picture. Do you want to comment a little bit, expand on what Tim and Andy have said about Frimley and Papworth?
Yeah, I mean, they've all done fantastic work. So I think in all of this, as we're looking through what we do nationally, there are some pockets of really great work. But by Jove, it's hard, isn't it? It's not easy. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we make it easier? I do think, with Andy, that, bringing the data up a level into a place where you can then build things on top is really important. You can then surface that information to the point of use. I think that's really important. And I think in talking to a lot of industry CIOs, people with lots of experience, lots of scars in, outside of health and in health. And the prevailing wind now is we've got so many legacy systems, we need to do something that allows us to leapfrog it, and the data layer is that thing, right? And that then gives us a bit more choice around how we deal with the legacy systems, whether we plug it in, whether we update it, whether we supersede it, as with security and some of the cyber things, we will need to downgrade some of these systems. And I know that's the CIO's headache everywhere in the NHS. So part of what we want to do is really find mechanisms that help that.
Okay, lovely, thanks. Okay, we've got any questions from the audience for our three panelists? You've been listening quite a lot. There's one here at the front, please. We've got some.
My name's Tony Zifra. I've got a question for Ming, but first of all, Terry, just to put you right, it's dilithium engines in Star Trek.
Of course.
It's not lithium. So,
The special award.
so Ming, you mentioned about data and data sharing. Fully agree. My focus very much around that is on patient safety. You did mention just at the end, in terms of metadata, you mentioned that to get some income growth for the country. Could you expand on that? Because that puts a little bit of alarm bells on me initially.
It shouldn't, right? So if you think about all the people that want to develop new applications for the NHS or new, they can't. A biggest step is actually getting access to data to know what they can build or what they can't build. So the whole point of metadata and some synthetic data is to give them near real data to do that development. So it's not about breaching patient confidence. It's making sure that we think about it as a platform. These are things that people need to build things on top. And then it'll be up to the NHS whether they take it up or not. But that, in terms of driving income, that there are lots of small British companies that can't do that in the UK, so they go off in the US or in Europe to do it, and then we lose them as an economy.
Thanks, Ming. Did you want to come back? No. Okay, other questions?
Hello. Hi, it's Gary Adams from Signature. I've done a few Scan for Safety implementations since 2013, including with Nena at South West London, and I totally get the data dictionary, if you will, the data at the bottom, and the standards and so on. But there's the policing of the standards, just the same for GS1. There's people who aren't encoding GS1 barcodes correctly, which then gives everybody the headache. And when I do a Scan for Safety implementation, I've got some pretty standard questions, because I guarantee you the same data will not be collected in the same way between departments in the same hospital when you start a project. So if you're looking at, everyone loves to talk about AI at the moment, is the buzzword, but unless you put the structured data that is policed, so everybody's collecting the same information in the same way, like take procedure codes. Everyone will say, yeah, we collect procedure codes. Well, is that planned or is it actual? And is it OPCS or is it just a friendly text? All of this is the variety that happens under the auspices of the same data element. There's got to be so data and then standardization before you get to anything remotely structured enough to do something clever with on a national level is my thoughts there. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. Who wants to take that? Andy.
So, I think that's right. One thing I think that's been really important for us at Royal Papworth is the right championing of this. I think there was a question about this earlier. I'm very lucky enough at Papworth that we have a CCIO, Chief Pharmacy Information Officer, Chief Nursing Information Officer. And I think all you need is the penny drop moment, and one of those will help lead and have that peer-to-peer conversation with their colleagues. So we're using those standards in terms of GS1 and making sure that we've got a steering group that is driving that interoperability and standards use across the site. Because as you say, it won't work unless you have that approach. It is a journey, and it's not easy, and some bits mean that you have to take a bit of a more ruthless approach in terms of saying, we're going to adopt this system because it works with GS1 standards. But that was the procurement advice in 2014, and we took that as being intent to make sure we get that position to provide good, high-quality data fit for purpose, which can protect our patients, be used for R&D, and planning our resources accordingly. And I think let's look at the outcome. So I'm very fortunate. I love Papworth as a place. There's an invitation through Glenn if you want to come and visit. Ming's already asked me that opportunity. I'd be pleased to showcase how this works because it is a real game changer. And I think as far as robot process automation or intelligent automation and AI are concerned, if you've got good quality data, those technologies are going to work much better with good high-end data than it is having to sift through poison data or inaccuracy, sufficient so that you can actually bet your bottom dollar on it. Because for data to be reliable, you've got to be trustworthy, it's got to have integrity, and you've got to be able to use it in that way.
Phil Lapish, Esneft again. Question for Ming. Where are we on the PIM? Because, as everyone said, the item master. I work with inventory. One of the biggest obstacles I have is getting a clean catalogue of data into the system so that we know what we're capturing. There's so many attributes on a lot of the catalogue systems. Like we're midway through our Epic integration. And populating Epic, one of the key points is that you have to tell that system which devices are implants and which one of them which are consumables to ensure that it captures the relevant information. Now, whether or not something's an implant or not seems to be open to interpretation by individual trusts. I'm having to tell the system which devices it should consider are implants so that it makes sure when they're documenting them, it catches lot numbers and expiry dates. That should all be driven from a core national data set or international data set that tells us which devices should be documented and how.
That's part of the device registry type work that we're doing and the standards against that. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I'm happy to pick that up offline. That's way down there. I'm not able to kind of respond straight away.
The item master's sort of been coming for, it feels like forever.
I think just to that point and to the earlier point, the NHS is very good at saying they're unique, but not being disciplined. Right, so I think one of the things that we need to, if you look at retail, you don't get this kind of, I might describe it this way or that way. You can't run a supply chain that way, right? So I think part of this is us getting more disciplined and making people, give them the flexibility, but they actually need to be disciplined in terms of their standards. And that will be us defining things better because we've quite often fudged things. Yeah. Let's pick that offline because I'd be quite keen.
I did a round table some years ago, which the chair of Marks and Spencers was there, and he said, "You don't think we let all 200 Marks and Spencers across England make these decisions themselves?" He said we wouldn't be able to run the organisation. Sharon, please.
It was just to help Ming out because I did ask my fellow panellist Fiona about this because when I came today, I said to our lead for implementation of Scan for Safety, what is the one thing, if we were going to ask for something that we would ask for, and it is the PIM, which is the Product Information Management. But the answer is David Lawson is working on this, and hopefully we should have something in terms of progress by the end of the calendar year.
Good, lovely. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Siobhan Duggan, GS1 Ireland. I have a question for Dr. Ho, please. You spoke about communicating with your neighbours and different systems. We're doing a lot of work in Ireland to standardise the patient wristband and the barcode on the wristband. Could you comment on how you manage the patient flow and ensure you've got the right patient in front of you?
Gosh, well, I'd say it's a work in progress. The one thing we've realised that to a certain EPRs is that they are proprietary, and it's trying to persuade your supplier to actually change. And that's one of the things that we've done with the GS1 standard. I might get myself in trouble with Epic here, but that's one of the things that we've been working really hard, particularly where we are both a tertiary provider, but also a referrer to tertiary centres. And I know that there's a EPIC implementation in Ireland going on at the moment as well. So that's been one of our real issues. A bigger point about data as well is that for EPRs, certainly it was in the press, when we went live and our neighbours went live with actually Oracle Cerner, there was a data blackout. And we spent ages trying to get the data formatted for our national reporting. And one thing that would really help is that there was a national standard for EPR systems to report that, so that actually we don't get these serial problems. Hopefully I'm not giving myself in too much trouble by saying that, but that's one of the keys. So to your point, it's about trying to get the, I suppose, national standards and actually probably international standards about how we implement that. So I haven't really quite answered your question, but I'm more sort of articulating the sort of journey that we're on to try and actually fix that. But it's again a bit strange. We work in the United Kingdom in a National Health Service, but actually it's quite fragmented. And to Andy's point, you can have different suppliers, but it's having an overall, overarching set of standards that everybody complies to. And I'm not quite sure we're there yet.
Well, it's to your point, there's really no N in NHS at the moment. Okay, other questions?
So Steve Bush, A&E Consultant, Chief Clinical Information Officer at Leeds. Just a question, we heard from Zabir Ahmed about a bit of a sea change in our approach to how our patients can have access to all of our own records. And I have to say that struck a real chord for me about sort of like you have access unless there is a really strict reason why, or a really significant reason why you shouldn't. I just wonder, and I've been mulling it over for the past 15 minutes and I'm just chucking it at you right now, but do you think that if we were able to do that as a nation, that would be supportive of unlocking some of the interoperable problems or interoperability problems that we're still experiencing?
Who wants to?
I mean, I think it would drive people to actually be more overt. I think if you're in an organisation where you've got a huge amount of data flowing out from your systems compared to the neighbours, I think that would force or make people think about how to do that. What is happening, as you probably know, is that the different EPR systems are trying to petition centrally how that's done. And I think that's probably the wrong way sometimes. I think there should be a national standard that this is the way the data should be. I personally believe that patients should have access to all their data. And we had pushback in our organisation about that from, guess what, clinicians. They were worried about, patients seeing their own data. I think that's actually just really retrograde. And actually now that we've released it, that's made much better. But I think there's been some real issues around that. But personally, I think we should work really hard. But I would hope there'd be some national standards to actually do that.
We've done some public engagement on this, and actually, interestingly, they want to be able to look at it. They don't really want it. Right? They want, and it's really interesting, quite a lot of the things around data is I want it to be there if I have a problem, so I don't have to repeat. So people with long-term conditions and complex care want it, because a lot of patients carry their folders around. I don't know if you know that. They actually carry a folder around with them to every appointment. That's how bad we are. And, and it's for friends and family that take them as well, who have to keep telling the same story. So there are layers of it which they think are absolutely there and necessary, but depending on their longitudinal record, they want to decide what they want to have access to, if that makes sense. For clinicians, the codified data most clinicians are fine with. It's the stuff that they scribble in the margins they don't want, right? And again, this is a discipline thing, isn't it? Because it's just getting that. In the thinking of the single patient record, there will be a standard. That's the only way we can do it, because we want to both allow for all data from all settings to come into a longitudinal record for the clinician to see the history, but also for patients and public in the future to add their personal health record from wearables and other apps that they want. So it's going to be a debate that we have a continue, and as we kind of prototype this stuff, we'll work that through.
As we know, we've heard the NHS is real. Does that kind of centralisation make implementation of information that we're talking about harder or easier?
It's actually, in a way, although it sounds like it's centralisation, the power and the empowerment, it's devolution. So it's really how do we get things down to more local areas. For data, what we've said is there needs to be almost a controlling mind and standards and how we operate the system, which will then allow local systems to augment the national with their local stuff and really allow local systems to be able to commission. So ICBs will need to commission services that are very pertaining to their population, and they will slightly differ, but we want to be able to monitor and measure nationally and also provide the digital spine nationally.
Okay, thank you. And there's one towards the back.
Yeah. Hi, Rick, one of the senior pharmacists from Leeds Teaching Hospitals. I've got a question that's kind of medicines oriented, but I think it's broader. There are, I think, a number of systems. You talk about leapfrogging, which is still paper-based. So there is a system of providing medicines to patients at home called home care, which those who work in hospital know. It's absolutely enormous. We spend well over half our drug budget at Leeds on medicines through home care. It is entirely paper-based. We have paper prescriptions being posted around 1,000 a week, paper purchase orders, paper invoices. There is no system to develop, and it just worries me a little bit that we're hearing about EPMA systems and EPR systems being refined and developed. How can trusts be supported in raising that there are still systems that have no electronic solution at all, not get forgotten about? Because that would be absolutely tragic. You know, the patient impact from home care when it goes wrong is huge. There was a parliamentary report last year. Yet because it's not picked up, there's probably not enough commercial opportunity for commercial developers to develop systems. How can we get that on the radar? And there must be other examples as well. I'm just worried things will get left behind.
I'm actually a pharmacist by profession, and talking to the digital pharmacy lead, Rahul, that is something that's on our radar, and we just need to do some work on it. It's really trying to work out what's the best way to do that nationally, because that home care thing is different in every trust. So it's really, but I think there will be some focus on that this year.
I do know that some of the EPR suppliers are actually trying to develop electronic prescribing. Certainly they've been to our trust to try and do that. And actually that's one of the real issues for clinicians about how do we get that seamlessly, because it also is a way of, to be blunt, controlling costs and stopping duplication. And for most patients, it's quite arcane having a paper system for prescribing, and then anybody who's had relatives or parents who need prescriptions, particularly if they go to hospital frequently, it is a real bugbear, particularly in a day where you can order virtually everything electronically from Amazon. Prescribing seems to be stuck.
We need to develop the way we innovate around this and provide a space for innovation hubs for startups, tech companies to be able to write into this space as well. I think one of the challenges is where we've got that gap, there is an opportunity, but what we do tend to find as well as a buyer is sometimes we have monopolies and duopolies, and in those circumstances, those providers can tend to charge a premium and not necessarily conform to standards, because it's really hard to put a ring around them and be able to steer them in the right direction. So I think there's a broader point there about actually making sure we understand the market, what we have and what we don't have, and where we need to stimulate it.
Okay, I'm going to take chairman's privilege and ask all our panelists the same question. Zubair Ahmed's gone, and I don't personally know what's going to be in the 10-year plan. There's been quite a lot trailed that one of the hopes is that ambient artificial intelligence will be part of the solution to productivity and moving the NHS into a truly iNHS. So imagine I'm in my clinic seeing a patient. How does that work? That means that in theory, ambient AI will listen to our consultation, maybe have a camera, see me examine the patient, and will organize the clinic letter to the GP, organize the scans, blood tests, everything. The reality, of course, as Ming pointed out, is that patient may have English as a second language. They may have a sibling who's screaming their head off. My phone might be ringing in the middle of it. It's quite a challenging compared to just being on a Zoom call. So for the three of you, I'll start with you, Andy. How far are we away from, like at Papworth that has gone a long way, how far are we away from ambient AI being in theatre, in clinic, in the emergency room and actually improving productivity?
I think really close. I think we're exploring solutions that do that now. But we're not there yet, but it is something that our clinicians are very aware of, and they've been asking actually for a little while now. We have some dictation that we use within the hospital. It's not moved to that level of ambience, and using the AI to help drive that as an innovation and saving time and being more productive. But it's definitely on our roadmap.
And Tim, for that to work, that AI, we're talking about interoperability. It has to be able to get into the PAC system, into the appointment booking system. It has to be able to send the stuff to the GP who's running a completely different system. And I want to know what the GP records show. In Frimley, is that plausible?
Well, we do have connected care viewing systems to do that. The key is whether you can get an AI system to actually automate that. There are systems that have already been showcased in the US doing that. And the risk, for good or for bad, is that clinicians in the UK have already started hunting out these systems. So in private practice, I know orthopedic surgeons who've got ambient AI systems which they're using and to control their practices. So it's how we adopt, and again, singing to Ming's earlier point, that we don't create a multitude of different systems that then we have difficulty integrating into the greater NHS. But I'm with Andy. I think there are systems already out there doing it. It's about how far and how hard we push it in the current environment. And also there'll be a cost.
Ming, you get the last word.
I think ambient voice is here, right? So has a tool to take from voice to text, that's here. Mm-hmm. The agentic bit that you were inferring, which is like, how does that text go back into the record? How does that then generate a blood test or whatever? That's a bit further away, but not that far. If you think about, we always follow kind of other systems. Google quite close to having agentic AI available on their Gemini version 2, I think, quite soon. So it's here. We need to create the pattern and the infrastructure to make that safe. We also need the test beds to make sure it actually adds value. But I think if you talk about the standards of the data, if you could get ambient voice to code, that would save a lot of time. It would make it more consistent. It would improve quality.
Okay, can you put your hands together? Thank our panel, please. Thank you.